So hopefully we'll get some more trickling in. If not, that's okay. I think we got an awesome audience right now. We're so happy that you're here with us. I wanted to go ahead and just kind of give a warm welcome to everybody. This is our first success workshop that we're doing for the spring semester. And just so you know, we do sorry, my computer's going off right now. But we do this every semester. And for this semester, we'll be having 4 total. So Sarah Ruthven is awesome, kicking us off with our first workshop with habits that work. So stay tuned and feel free to ask questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring that. Through here, or if you wanted to go ahead and use the reactions or get some sort of our attention, I promise we will get to you with questions in between or afterwards. Okay, so we can go ahead and kick off. Sarah, thank you so much for doing this.
All right, yeah, no problem. Let's see, I see a few coming in. So my name is Sarah Ruthven. I teach art history at MCC, and I came to learning about habits as trying to make some things better and trying to just sort of on my own, trying to work on a few things that I thought, I could be doing this better. I could be more effective in a couple of different ways. And so I started reading, and around the same time, I started working on the MCC 101 curriculum. And if you've already taken that class, I suspect a lot of you have, that there's a little bit of talk in there about setting goals for yourself right at the beginning of the semester. So those things sort of came together for me. And I find myself, whenever I have a student who's interested, talking about how to build some better habits for better, whatever the goal is, right? We can just sort of fill in whatever goal it is and what habits sort of line up to that. So I have a couple of slides that I'm going to show on the screen. So I'm going to share my screen there. So just to keep us sort of on track. But if you have questions, put them in the chat or just unmute and ask. I'm more than happy to stop and answer questions as we go. All right. Let's see. Okay. So we're talking about how to put habits to work so that you can achieve whatever goal it is that you are trying to achieve. You've read this because it was the blurb for this workshop, but I want to focus on a couple of things. We're going to talk about how you build habits, how you break habits, and then really how you line those habits up to what you're trying to accomplish. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to pull a couple of, I don't know, they might feel cheesy, but they might feel memorable. So we're trying to find that perfect middle ground between cheesy and memorable. Little phrases that help us to think about habits in a new way. So our first one comes from a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. So this is the sort of habits primer, right? If you're trying to work on habits, it's such a good read. But you're college students and you're busy, so I'm going to pull some of the fundamental things from that book so that we can start thinking about habit building. What I find with a lot of freshman students coming in, and this was true about me when I was in school too, is that I would start to make some changes thinking I was trying to reach a goal. And then somehow it would fall apart. And I would think, oh, well, those weren't the changes I needed to make. Time to try something else. Or I would have taken it as perhaps like a personal failure. I tried to do this thing, but I didn't get an A in that class and I was trying to. And so that must have been something wrong with me, or perhaps in my less self-reflective moments, maybe it was something wrong with the teacher or the class. And so this phrase, all the action happens at 32 degrees, I thought was really interesting. This was a moment in the book Atomic Habits that really sort of hit home. So when we're thinking about habit building, we're talking about lots of little habits, and habits are sometimes easy, sometimes hard, depending on what we're trying to do. But there's this issue that happens with our habits. Habits take time to build up before they help us reach our goals. And in the middle time, in that weird period where you're working on habits, but you're not reaching your goals, it can be really frustrating. What you're seeing in this chart where he's labeled it Valley of Disappointment, this is that place where you're working on habits, but you haven't actually reached your goal. So imagine that you are an ice cube, and you're in the middle of, those big walk-in refrigerators at restaurants sort of thing. So you're in a refrigerator, you're this ice cube in the refrigerator. The refrigerators are set colder than freezing, right? Colder than the freezing point. Let's say they're set around like 29 degrees. if you start to raise the temperature of that refrigerator up closer to 32 degrees, you're making progress towards melting that ice cube, except it won't melt until you get to 32 degrees. And habit building is like that. It's like raising the temperature of the room. The problem is you can spend a lot of time raising the temperature of the room, but you don't hit the ultimate goal of that habit until you've stacked up enough temperature changes in the room, until you've changed your environment enough that you reach your goal. So what they're showing you here is if you're after results and you're giving those results time, there's this place where we think, okay, it'll be a straight line across. I'm going to, and I hear it from students a lot. I am going to read all of the readings. I am going to study my notes. I am going to prepare for quizzes better. I'm going to put a calendar reminder so I don't miss that assignment. And those things happen maybe haphazardly because it's hard to sometimes get a goal going. And then you don't get an A, or you don't end up with a 3.0 that semester. And it's possible to think, but I did the habit and I tried to do the thing, so something must be wrong. And in reality, what's going on is that you just started changing the temperature of the room, but you didn't change it enough to melt the ice cube yet. But that doesn't mean the work you were doing wasn't worthwhile, because you were making those steps. You were starting to change that environment. So what James Clear is telling us in Atomic Habits with that phrase, all the action happens at 32 degrees, is there are things we can do in this, what he calls the valley of disappointment, before we actually start to see results as time is marching on. There are things we can do to better prepare ourselves. And there are things we can do to really set up and line up a bunch of goals so that we can try to maybe bump the temperature up in the room a little faster, letting ourselves see the success of our habits. The reality is humans are pretty simple, and we don't like to do things that we don't seem to be very good at. And so we need to see results happen relatively quickly. If we spend too much time in this valley of disappointment, we're pretty likely to give up on whatever it is that we were trying to do. And so if we think about one of the ways we can sort of steel ourselves in habit building to stick with it, even when it doesn't feel like it's working, is to remember that it is to reframe it, right? To recontextualize what we're doing in our habits. We're not just putting in reminders into our phone to remember that an assignment is due soon. That's one step towards slowly changing the temperature of the room so that the ice cube melts, right? To get the results that you want. So how do we begin to do that? So this next one comes from Dr. Tracy Mann, who works at the University of Minnesota's Eating Lab. This is where she does a lot of behavior experiments, specifically around food and nutrition. And she has a very habits-based sort of foundation that has been proved over multiple studies about how people eat. And so a lot of her references are about food, but they apply to any kind of habit making. In her book, Secrets from the Eating Lab, she says where you put the cookie jar matters. So if we're trying to stack a bunch of useful habits up to change the temperature of the room to get to our goals, there are a couple of things we can do to simply make that easier. So what she's saying when she says where you put the cookie jar matters is something that actually I've really benefited from. And so this one I thought for me was sort of like, I had some personal success with this. And so I thought it was useful to share. It's literally about cookies. So I had, especially during this pandemic time, gotten into a habit that I didn't like, a bad habit of eating cookies at night. I wasn't hungry. I didn't even really, except Lady Gaga Oreos, I didn't even really love the cookies I was eating. It was just about having a cookie, right? And you know how that goes. Once you build a habit, it's really hard to stop the habit. What she's saying in her phrasing, where you put the cookie jar matters, is that humans are really lazy. And she doesn't say that with any sort of judgment, just we're really lazy. We're sort of built to be, we're built to conserve energy. That way, if a woolly mammoth starts chasing us, we can like dart off and we won't be so sluggish from the Lady Gaga Oreos that we can't survive, right? So what she's saying is that if you don't want to do something anymore, the best thing you can do for yourself is just make it that much harder to do. So if I want an environment where I can build up my habits, but I also want an environment where I can start to break some of my bad habits, all I have to really do is make slight shifts that make the bad habits the harder thing to do. So she suggests Simply take the cookies and put them in a place where you cannot reach them without a step stool. Because 9 times out of 10, you will not go get a step stool to get a cookie. The step stool is the thing keeping me from eating a cookie until I realize, gosh, it's not a habit anymore to eat a cookie every night. Now it does not matter where I put the cookies because I've already broken the bad habit that was more about reaching for something than it really was about. So where we put it matters. Oh, sorry, there's an echo all of a sudden. Is maybe somebody unmuted? There we go.
Yes,
Okay.
Sarah.
Okay. So you can help to break a bad habit by simply making it the harder thing to happen in your environment. And you can also then boost other habits. So let's say I don't want to just not eat a cookie. Instead, I also want to eat a carrot stick every once in a while. Well, if I have to pull the carrot sticks out, chop them, rinse them, do something with them, those are so many steps in between me and that easy thing I want to have happen. But if I put the cookie jar in a useful place, in an easy place, maybe I rinse them ahead of time or just buy the ones that are already ready to be eaten, I'm more likely to reach for those things. So what Tracy Mann is showing us, and she does this through numerous studies with peoples and behaviors, in particular for her around eating, is that we can discourage the bad habits quite simply by simply putting a barrier between us and the bad habit. And it doesn't take much because we're really built to conserve our energy. We won't try so hard. I've heard a lot of students tell me that they've had a lot of success in staying off their phones when they intended to be studying by simply setting their phone in a different room or off to another space where they actually have to get up off their bed to go get it. And they're so unlikely to get up off their bed to go get it that instead they study. In the same way, if you have a desk and a study space ready to go, and there's always a pen there, and there's always a charger for your computer, and there's always a set of, there's always paper, there's always just some little supplies that you need. Now, when you sit down to study and you don't have to find all of those things, those simple habits of making sure that your study space is ready can do a huge amount of work in changing the environment that you're in to boost that temperature up so that you get to your goals faster. If you sit down to study, which is something you already don't want to do reasonably, right? There's a lot of other more entertaining things than studying. If I already don't want to do this, what does it really take to keep me from actually doing it? Oh, I can't find a pen. I guess I'll wait. Or, oh, I don't really remember where I left my textbook. It's not right here next to me. And then something else becomes a distraction. There's a lot we can do to our environments to simply make the good habits easier and the bad habits a little harder to get to. With that in mind, I want to talk about a few things that I see students turn to quite often to try to achieve their habits. And what I'm going to try to do is turn them into a little bit of a problem so that we're not so quick to rely on them. The first one is the idea of self-control. Over and over again, humans are sort of reliant on the idea that I can control all of my environment. And if I'm not achieving the habits that I'm trying to achieve, it must be that I need more control, or oftentimes this is referred to as things like self-discipline. But the reality is self-control and self-discipline are like a muscle. They get better the more you use them. So if it's faulty at first to sort of get these things going, and it feels like you should be able to be a little more disciplined or be a little more controlled of your environment, it's a reminder that you have to use it over and over and over again to make it stronger. Self-control is not something that some people have and some people don't have. It's just something that some people practice more often than others. The other is to remember that motivation is an emotion. It's just like being sad or happy. It comes and it goes, which means you cannot rely on it. At the beginning of the semester, I see so many motivated students. They're writing in planners because it's a good habit to write your assignments down. And those first couple of assignments, man, they come in quick. They come in on time. Sometimes perish the thought, they come in a little early. And that's because you're motivated. It's new and it's exciting. But if we only rely on doing our habits when we're motivated to do our habits, the reality is they're not going to last very long. Of course, we know this if we look at gyms across the United States, right? In January, people are motivated by their new goals and they're excited and they're working. But by March, those gym floors are basically empty. So we can't always rely on motivation. That doesn't mean we can't use motivation when we have it. If you're motivated to do something, use that motivation. Be in an environment that's already set up so you can just run with that motivation. But when it's missing, we have to replace it with something else. We have to rely on something else. And then keep in mind that willpower, just hunkering down, or what we sometimes will say white knuckling it, like if you hold on to something so tight and the blood starts to leave your fingers, willpower is a limited resource. Humans are exhausted by exerting willpower. And the truth is, we're not always so good at it. There's a few studies that are sort of simply set up to have people look through a word search for a certain word. And when we're only looking for one word, we're pretty good at finding it. But if you take that same group of people and tell them, please find these 3 words. Now I'm looking for 3 words all at one time. And as it turns out, my willpower is not so strong then, because now I'm trying to do multiple things and I'm having trouble sort of the hierarchy of that thinking and prioritizing one over the other. Our willpower is limited resource and it exhausts us trying to use it. So if our habits are only working because we're pushing through to make them happen, because we're restricting fun and exciting things to make the good thing happen, if we're motivated, but there's not much behind that motivation, and we're only relying on our willpower to make it happen, we're going to fail at our habits. We're not going to be able to stack those habits up for long enough to change the temperature of the room. So what can we do? What are some things that we can do? We can practice self-control, self-discipline, right? We can practice it over and over again. I find for a lot of students, one of the ways that we do this is by just checking in more, a habit of checking in. This can be checking into anything. If you're in an online class in particular, I think self-control becomes a really challenging aspect. I myself have taken a ton of online classes. I'm actually in one right now for copyright and Creative Commons and how it works. And it seems silly almost, the number of things that have to chime and ding to get me to get into that online class more often than just when something is due. So I make, I can't say her name because she'll hear me, Alexa. I have her tell me that she has, that I have things to do. I use my phone calendar with reminders so that my phone tells me what I'm supposed to be doing. I put it on my work calendar at different points, not just when something is due, but at different points, because just checking in can be a really powerful tool to build up self-control. It might seem like a little thing, and it's definitely not a habit that by itself will get you to melt the ice cube and reach your goals. But if I am regularly checking into a class, going into my online class, maybe meeting with my instructor during their student conference hours when I don't even have a question, just to say, hey, this thing I read was interesting, or maybe I'm not sure if I understand it, can I run it past you? Those little check-ins, they're little practices at self-control. If you've ever tried to build muscle, you know, you don't actually need to lift 100-pound things. You can just lift 10-pound things, but do it a bunch of times and you'll still build muscle. And self-control is like that. Little opportunities to build are sometimes the best. It also helps to try those little habits, those little tiny broken down habits, because those are the ones that we also feel the immediate success of. If I practice self-control and I click into my class on a Tuesday when nothing's even due until Thursday, and I check into the content and I look at what's going on and I have a good plan going forward for what to do, I immediately feel the benefits of that. I feel lighter. I'm not stressed by waiting for something to come up or the stress of not knowing. I did a thing, right? I said I would check it early and I did. And those little victories, those are the things we need to get us through that valley of disappointment, right? Because now I feel the benefit and I feel the victory of having done that little thing. Similarly with motivation, motivation's great when we have it. When we don't have it, how can we get it back? Well, one of the strongest ways that you can get your motivation back is to remember what you were doing those things for in the first place. So this is where, and I want to jump ahead. I'm going to jump ahead one more. There we go. That's me holding my little movement tracker because I wanted to be sure that I was just, in this pandemic life where we're home so much, I'm just home a lot. And I thought, I feel like I'm just not moving, like just physically moving to make myself feel better. Nothing, wild about, any particular goal in that movement, just move more. So I just started tracking on days when I had moved a thing. And that sensation of filling in that one little rectangle is so gratifying that I can remember how good that feels and do it again and again and again. And I can make it easy for myself, right? I can keep the things I need to do movement easily available. Next to that, my proud movement tracker, next to that, we have two kinds of habit formations. One is outcome-based and one is identity-based. I see in MCC 101, which I teach every semester, I see a lot of students set up outcome-based habits. Over and over again, I hear students telling me, I need to get a 3.0 to stay, I want that high level eligibility for college sports and I want to be recognized for that. Or I know I want an A in this class, or I'm interested in graduating. I'm trying to transfer. I have this career I'm after. Those are all outcome-based habits. They start out here on the outer ring, and then they work towards yourself, which is your 3. You're in the bullseye here. And so there's this outside thing that I'm trying to accomplish. And if I've lost motivation, the problem is I'm out here, right? And my motivation is based on this thing in this outer ring. But if I start to set identity-based habits, then the motivation is internal. It's not this big picture thing that's going to take me a while to get to. It's based internally in me. And so we set I am statements. So I've been reading Atomic Habits now for a while and working through some of this. And so in January, when I recognized that I was motivated, just naturally motivated at the turn of the year and setting New Year's resolutions, I was naturally motivated to just move more. So while I was motivated, I set up a tracker and I made some space in my house where I could sort of easily get to my favorite movement tools. But the big piece for me to make it work was that I had to say things like, I am a mover. I am someone who moves regularly because I feel good when I move regularly. My motivation is not out here in the outcomes ring, like a certain, strength gain or a certain weight loss or a certain sort of like I can now move this much material or lift this heavy thing in a way that I hadn't before. Instead, my motivation is that I am a mover. This is something I am. And so when I sort of lose motivation, and if you look closely with my tracker, I took this picture a while ago, but you'll see some places in here where I missed like 3 days in a row of moving. Something else got in the way, right? And I was able to pull myself back into that by saying, but wait a second, I am a mover. So maybe I don't feel like moving right now in this moment, but I am a mover. So I'm going to get back into this because that's what movers do, right? Movers move their bodies in ways that feel good. Some other, back. There we go. All right. Some other ways that we can sort of change our environments to help raise the temperature of the room to reach our goals, to not rely only on willpower and motivation, but to see some other things. There are some other things that we can do. One is we can find our outlets. And this comes from a book called Radical Belonging by Lindo Bacon, who wrote some of the original texts on a movement called Health at Every Size. So that's sort of where the original work comes from. In finding your outlets is remembering that the work of habit making and trying to reach goals and being the person that you want to be, I am a studier, I am a reader, I am someone who does well at math, that oftentimes that's about finding little rewards, ways to sort of encourage yourself to keep going. So finding your outlets is how you recharge. So if motivation is an emotion, then what we know is our motivations can change based on how much energy we have, based on how much fun we're having. Are we enjoying the processes that we're in? When I'm exhausted, I'm not motivated. So an outlet might be getting better rest. Another outlet might be just occasionally going out and having fun, right? Because oftentimes, especially the work of college students, can be really daunting and rigorous, and there can be motivation in that, but sometimes we just need something else to sort of keep us going. Forgiving yourself, and this one is, I think, is huge. Think about all the times that you may have relied on your own ability to sort of self-discipline yourself to do what you needed to do, or you relied on motivation to write that essay at the last minute because you weren't motivated before, but at the last minute that adrenaline hit and then you suddenly felt motivated. Or when you felt like, I can do this, I know I want to do this, and your willpower just only got you to week 3 instead of week 16. There's a lot that we sort of dump on ourselves when that starts to happen. We can quickly become people who are not saying, I am these things, but instead people who are saying, I failed at that already. There's no way I'm going to do it right. When in reality, you just hadn't changed the temperature of the room yet. So there's an opportunity in there for being more forgiving of yourself. That can be really hard in the college environment because, let's face it, us faculty in general are not particularly forgiving. You have one shot to do the essay. We'd like you to do it well, excellently, to be honest. And so it can be hard to feel like you have a forgiving space there. The forgiving part of like, I didn't reach my goal that time. The reason it's important to say, okay, but that's not who I am. That's just a mistake I made, is that most, especially in your freshman year in college, most classes are set up in a way where you can fix it. You can redeem yourself. You can, with a little more work in those habits, have some more time and to change the temperature of the room. And when you don't have that available to you, you can talk to your instructors about what you're doing. There are ways to actively forgive, right? Not just say, I mean, it's important, I think, to say like, I messed that up, but that's not who I am. That's just a mistake I made. But I also think there's like an active forgiving process, saying it out loud. I waited to the last minute to write that paper, but that's not who I am. I'm trying to do these other things and it's new for me. And I think you'll find that in that active forgiving space, there's a lot of opportunity to make improvements and then honestly to make some changes and not to have to face those consequences all your own. And the other thing is leaning on others. It's great to see so many faces in here because one of the things that we can sort of show in lots of different avenues is that our behaviors change the best when we surround ourselves with people who are also changing their behaviors. That doesn't mean that you should always surround yourself with people who have already changed their behaviors, though they can be helpful. They can provide insight and wisdom. When you are someone who's actively trying to change their habits, and you're standing next to someone who's actively trying to change their habits, you can lean on each other. You can talk about how hard it is. You can troubleshoot problems that you're having. Surrounding yourself with people who are trying to do this work is one of the number one ways that you could actually change the temperature of the room, is by surrounding yourself with people who are habit changing. We know in terms of sort of college level studies that students who engage in activities through student life do better in school. And it's not magic why that happens. They have chosen to surround themselves with other people who are doing this college thing, right? They're taking classes, they're doing the readings, they're sometimes not doing them the best they could, but they're trying. And surrounding yourself in that community of other people who are building habits, it has a sort of natural effect on you as well. There are a lot of other things you can do to build your own resilience. But what I liked about what Lindo Bacon is talking about is that it's not just an inside job. Resilience is not just one more place where you need to have willpower and self-control and motivation. Building up resilience is a thing you do with other people. It's a thing you do through the process of trial and error. And that can include your faculty. That can include your student success coaches. That can include your fellow classmates. That can even include, just the person you're sitting next to whose maybe name you don't even know, or the person who's on the Zoom screen next to you these days. Just being in that community of learners can have a major effect on how resilient you become, so that when you miss the mark on the goals that you're trying to reach, you still can pull back and say, but I am still these things. So that's slides. I want to turn these off because then you can't have a discussion when you're staring at someone's slideshow. That's fact. Not a study, but definitely a fact. So if you would like to turn your camera on, I would love to see your faces, but no pressure if that's not where you're at right now. You can also unmute. I'd love to chat back and forth. We still have half an hour. I just want to say, I intended for 30 minutes and I actually hit it. If you've ever been in a class for me, you know that never happens. I always overtalk. So let's talk a little bit about things that I can expand on, maybe some questions about some of the things we covered, or I'd love to hear about maybe habits that you're thinking that you'd like to work on, or if you just have a goal in mind, and we could troubleshoot a little bit. What are those habits that would sort of change the temperature on that goal? Some of that could be personal, and you may not want to share. You can always put that in the chat. You do have the option, if you open up the chat at the bottom of your screen, if you hover over that, you'll have the chat feature. And you do have the option to just send that to me, but you need to be thoughtful about clicking on that. So you could send that directly to me. Otherwise, you're sending it to everyone. But I'd love to hear a little bit about habits you're thinking about or working on, or something I could expand on for you. Yeah, Kim, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for doing this, Sarah. My keyboarding teacher, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Sorry, hon, it's doing an update. Sorry. My keyboarding teacher, Julie, invited us this morning to your seminar, and I'm enjoying it. I've been out of work since 2019. Started back at college at 50 years old in 2020. And it's taken me since September of 2019 and a move out of Illinois to find employment. So as of Monday, I will have 3 full-time college courses and a brand new full-time career. So I would love some helpful tips.
Yeah. So, okay. I don't want to say that my situation is the same as yours. I don't want to do that. I just want to tell you about something that's happening for me right now, which I feel like has some parallels. When the pandemic hit, I have a 7-year-old, and we chose to do virtual learning for the full academic year. So I typically have a child sitting next to me learning Common Core math, which is a beautiful thing, but I'm an art history teacher, not exactly engaging and thrilling.
I have been there.
Loud and it's a distraction. And then I'm teaching, and I knew how to use Zoom before we started, but I had some skills to build, right, to be better at online teaching. And then I just have some volunteer work that I do, that I organize some food drives. And so that is a thing. And there's more people in my house, and I would like them all to get out. And there's all these things, right? All these factors. And the reality is, when you're sort of the boss of life, right? When you're sort of the boss and you have lots of decisions to make, you can get easily caught up in decision fatigue. We are not designed to constantly make decisions all day long. Some things have to be on automatic pilot. And when you're going through as many sort of life transitions as you are, and so many unknowns, it's impossible to make that many decisions. And habits are just making the same decision over and over again. So I think the focus has to become, how can I put some of these on autopilot? How can I make it so that I'm not making so many decisions during the day? For me, that has a lot of regularity to just my daily life. I eat the same breakfast every day because I just don't want to make the decision of what to eat. I wear the same thing every day. I mean, not, I wear, so I was looking to see, my co-teacher, Tim Seitz, is on here, who I think can attest for this. So I own 5 of the same shirt and 5 of the same cardigan, and I just wear the same thing every day because that's just one less decision that I have to make in the morning that I don't want to make. And those decisions don't feel taxing, but the more of those habits that I've just dropped away, now I'm freed up to make the decisions that are hard, that I have to make, right? There's no way to do all the things you're trying to do. It's going to require sometimes saying, I'm not going to do this, or looking at a class syllabus and saying, I should do the reading quiz, but right now I have to focus on this other thing, and missing one reading quiz is not going to ruin my grade in this class. And those are trade-offs that are hard to make. And the only way to have the mental bandwidth to make those decisions is to pull some other ones out. You have to be well rested, right? We can't be motivated when we're tired. We can't be in good self-control when we're exhausted. So I don't know about you, but my phone tells me to go to bed at 10, right? At 10, my phone is like, please turn me off. I don't want to play Candy Crush, Fishdom, whatever you're doing anymore, right? And some nights I say, no, we're not done. I'm going to play some more. But most nights I'm like, okay, you're right, phone. And then I do what it says, right? Those kinds of things that you can set to autopilot, that you can set to, I don't need to think about this anymore, can be really helpful when you're trying to do, honestly, more than what is humanly possible. every year we learn, there's college studies that sort of longitudinal studies, the National Community College Benchmarking Project is one of them. And it tells us about students at community college level nationally. And one of the statistics that constantly comes up at MCC is that our students at MCC work more hours than students on a national average work at a community college. And I think that's a really interesting statistic about us. I see a lot of students telling me they're throwing their hands up in the air, frustrated that they can't meet the academic goals they're trying to meet. And when I ask them how many hours a week they're working, they tell me things like 30. And I think, well, friends, of course you're not meeting your academic goals. That's too much. But sometimes that's necessary. You have to survive. So when that's the case and you have these competing issues for your time, what can you push to the side, right? What can go on autopilot? What can no longer be the thing that you're focused on, so that when it comes time to making those tough habit decisions, you're freed up with energy, with motivation to make those decisions when you need to make them. I feel like that's a wildly insufficient answer, though, to what you're trying to take on, because it does sound like so much to take on. So then the other thing I would say is, if you can't get the temperature of the room to change because there are these circumstances outside of your control, right? That doesn't mean you aren't making progress. So finding ways to appreciate the invisible changes that are happening can also be really helpful. And I'm not going to lie, I think sometimes that can be about just rewarding yourself with, my favorite thing to reward myself with is shopping on Ulta's app. I used to joke, but now I have to use the app. The joy I find in new lip liner is absurd, right? It makes no sense at all. I don't even need it, but it's like an inexpensive thing that I can purchase and I just sort of feel good. And I save those things. Like, I'm just going to reward myself with randomly choosing, this thing. I have some lip glosses from Persona coming soon. So, but it doesn't have to be that. It can also just be, I am going to take care of myself in this moment, getting this thing off my plate that is distracting me. So I'm going to sit down and pay that bill, or I'm going to, like, as soon as this essay hits, I'm going to immediately write a rough draft or an outline and send it into the instructor and say, I'm having trouble focusing. I think this is what you want. Can you help me out here a little bit with that? Those kinds of things where you can, like, sort of get ahead of it, get in front of it, is also a way to celebrate habit making, because you just made your life easier and maybe freed up a little bit of free time to, like, online shop or whatever it is that sort of, invigorates you in, like, a silly way, in a light way, in a fun way.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm proud of you for lip liner versus Girl Scout cookies.
Yeah, I already have Lady Gaga Oreos hidden in a cabinet.
I've never even heard that.
So we don't need to add more to that.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see, in the chat, there's another one. I need to make time to study. I always get busy with things around the house and watching my partner's daughter during e-learning. It's hard for me not to get distracted and balance life in school. Yeah, so I hear a couple of things in this. Whenever I hear a student say something like, I need to make time, I always want to push back and say, I know where that turn of phrase comes from, but you can't. It's the one thing you cannot do, right? You cannot make time. So what I think you're saying is, I recognize my priorities are out of whack. They're not aligned to who I am. So the things you're doing that are keeping you busy, I think, are valuable things. But at some point, you're saying there's this other valuable thing and I'm not giving it its time. If I am someone who makes time to study, then I have to do the hard work of making time to study. And that is sometimes going to mean telling someone else, I cannot do this thing for the amount of time that I'm currently giving it. And no one feels good doing that. I think that's one of the hardest things about sort of setting up habits that are about I am statements, is that if you have 3 or 4 competing I am statements, it feels like someone's going to get the short end of the stick, or someone is going to not benefit from the time that you can give them. And there's no way around that other than community building, right? Other people who can step in and help in the void, or being able to say to someone, I've been giving you an amount of time that I can no longer sustain, and I have to pull back on that. And that's going to be hard for us to figure out. So I'm going to do it in small pieces so that I can figure out what's the right balance. sometimes approaching these things just like an outside observer, I think, can be helpful sometimes, as if you're sort of hovering above the situation so that you can simply be curious. I'm curious what would happen if I spent 20 minutes studying on Monday. Would that make an effect on my future plans? It didn't. I'm curious if I upped that to 30 minutes, would that make a difference, right? Or I notice I'm blocking the time, but I don't know what to do with the time. I need to seek better study skills. You can't really know where sometimes the holes are in what's keeping you from changing the temperature, right? Of building up enough habits to meet your goals if you can't be curious about them and be willing to experiment. And being willing to experiment means being willing to fail at them wildly. And you can't really sort of change that. You can't really say, okay, well, what's a balanced life school thing without trying to figure that out? And that's going to come with some mistakes. Like that wasn't balanced because the work didn't get done, or that wasn't balanced because I have these life responsibilities, but they didn't get done. So I think finding where that balance has to be one of trial and error. Feels, I think, daunting, like, because error means I'm going to make the mistake a lot. But I think if you think about it as, I'm just curious what if I did this and followed through on that? There's another one in the chat. How about doing with this pain? What are your thoughts? Are you talking about physical pain or like emotional pain, or like dealing with past issues? You can just put it in the chat to stay anonymous. So I want to be really careful here because I am in no way qualified to share things about how to deal with any kind of pain, emotional or physical. What I do think is that anytime that you are recognizing there's something going on with me and I need more information about it, and that could be physical, that could be mental, that could be emotional, that could be habits, right? Something is not right. Something is amiss in this picture. There's a missing element here, and I need to figure out what that thing is. And I think the idea of pulling in your community, right, getting the experts and the expert advice that you need, and as well as like a supporting community who can help you through that, especially when you're talking about things like chronic illnesses for which there isn't really a fix, but there are maybe some habits you can build to sort of ease symptoms, that sort of thing. So I think and I will say Lindo Bacon, who wrote Radical Belonging, talks a little bit about this. It's a very long book. If you have time, cool. Most of the time college students do not. So I think there's something to be said for that. Community sometimes needs to have an expert in it, right? That community sometimes needs to have someone who can say, oh, this is what's going on, right? And getting that level of sort of expertise. And I think, for medical things, that has to be a medical professional who can give advice. I think at MCC, that has to be people with good study habits already, right? Talking to the student success coaches, using the student life services to get those things that you need to be successful.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So what do you do if you have a really hard time, like being in the valley of disappointment, like you said, or if you notice that you're like in that area a lot of the time?
Yeah, so I think there can be some good work in tracking, which is why I was tracking my movement, because I'm definitely someone who prefers to sit and read a good book, right? It's how I got so good at art history, because I found a profession that said, you want to sit and read? Go ahead and do that for a while. And I'm in my happiest in that state. When I've been trying in the past to sort of keep movement going, I have gotten really discouraged. Like, oh, I missed 3 days. What am I going to do? But tracking can show you whether you're actually making a difference or not. So here's my updated tracker, right? We're into mid-February. I did better at the end of January, and I am really doing well at the beginning of February with moving more. And I wouldn't have really known that if I just thought back and reflected on whether I'd been moving every day. The truth is, humans aren't particularly good at that kind of past memory, right? We tend to think we're a lot better than we really are at stuff, or we tend to get down on ourselves thinking we're a lot worse than we really are. So perhaps there's a habit that you're working on and it hasn't moved the dial yet, but it's still a useful habit. It's still a good one to sort of have in the toolkit. Tracking how often you're actually doing it can oftentimes lift you out of feeling like, oh, I'm not making any difference here. Why would I keep doing this thing? I think that's especially true when it comes to studying and reading course material. When you read an essay that a teacher assigns or a chapter in a textbook that a teacher assigns, there's no immediate benefit to you. I actually think there's some benefits. We can talk about what those are, but I don't think you feel it, right? You don't feel the immediate benefit of that action right away in a way that it would encourage you to do more. But if you started tracking how often you're reading the course materials and what grade you're getting on the assignments, I suspect you would come to find that in the times when you read more, the grades improved, or in the times that you read more, your general understanding of the topic improved. But looking back, that might feel all twisted, right? Looking back, you might have just been really stressed and honestly don't remember how often you were reading. Or looking back, you might think, yeah, I was reading most of the time, to find out, no, I read like one article fully all the way through, focused on it, sort of thing. So I think tracking can really help you sort of get out of that valley of disappointment to see the progress that you're making, little steps at a time. I think crafting some I am statements can be useful as well. So I find myself somewhere in the balance of, I write I am statements in my like my planner, but I feel too cheesy to like journal that, if that makes sense, right? Like it feels like too like, I'm not writing that down. And then how did I feel today, Sarah? I just can't quite bring myself to that. It doesn't feel like me. So, but if I start to say things like, I am a diligent reader. I constantly read the things that I've been assigned to read. I can now check in on that statement. Am I showing up to that habit? Am I a diligent reader? Have I been doing that? And sometimes that's just a mental check-in, so I think tracking sometimes can help. I think sometimes just developing the I am statement and then revisiting it occasionally. Am I the thing I said I am? Can be helpful. And then other people, right? I can't express this enough, how important it is to have a community of people around you, because then you can check in with someone else. Have you noticed that I've been doing this differently? Because I feel like I've been doing this differently. More often than not, your people around you are going to notice the change before you ever do. So they're going to notice, hey, I've noticed you with your nose in a book quite often. Or, even another classmate, did you already start that paper? Yes, I did. You already started that paper, right? They're going to alert you to those changes a lot faster than you're likely to see them, especially if you feel stuck in those habits where you're doing stuff and it's not sort of getting you to the end spot that you're trying to get to. And then the last thing I want to say about that is, you have to get success eventually, right? No one sticks to a thing that they're always failing at. So if you're not, and this may sound like a cheat, but I think it's really useful. If you've set yourself a goal and you are simply not reaching it, it's either time to reevaluate that goal or set a lower metric for that goal. So if I want to move 7 days a week and I'm not hitting it, and I'm never getting 7 days a week, is the problem the movement, or is it just the 7? I think it's just the 7. What if I just said 3 days a week? I can hit 3 days a week. Sure, I can do that. Well, now all of a sudden I'm motivated because I said I would move 3 days a week, and I did move 3 days a week. And sometimes just scaling it back till it's manageable, and then you can scale it back up again, right? I'm going to pull this habit into something I can actually do. I think what you want to be in habits is like 80 to 90% of the time I do this thing. No one's perfect. You're always going to miss sometimes. 80 to 90% of the time I do this thing because I am the person who does these things, right? Don't let it, I have a student who says to me, it doesn't even feel like I did it, or like, who's this girl who does these things? And every time I hear that turn of phrase, who's this girl who does these things, I push back on it. You are the person who did those things. You got to own it, right? Because those are sort of mini victories that happen. So having those little pieces of success can really spur you on to keep going. Having a community around you, because they'll notice. And I do want to, like, a commercial for faculty. we would love to talk to you about the mini victories. And if you don't see them, I would love to fill those in. So if you're in my class and you've written 2 essays for me and I'm seeing progress and you came and asked me about that progress, oh my goodness, it would be the best use of my time in student conference hours ever on the planet. And also I do student conference hours on Zoom, so I wouldn't be as bored as I normally am. Right. Sometimes just like finding out who are those people you can check in with and say, I'm not feeling the progress. Do you see the progress? And we can sort of work on where that is. And then we can also work on where that isn't. Just sometimes the conversation is useful.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. We have like 9 minutes left. And then I do have to actually get my son off the Nintendo babysitter. So, but other questions, I'd love to answer them. I find the silence soothing, not awkward, so I don't mind waiting. But I do want to put in a commercial for if you have not already taken MCC 101, I think there's something there in the sort of early goals work. Oh, there's a question in the comments. When I say get moving, do I mean exercise? Okay, I don't like to, how do I put this? I just mean moving. Can I grab them? Hold on a second. Let me grab these. Okay. I like to sit and read books. For Christmas, I got my son these yoga activity cards from the dollar store. He likes pugs, so that's why I bought them. I didn't even know what was inside of them. So we get these cards and they're animals doing yoga poses. They're ridiculous. Oh, that one's upside down. There you go. Like a sheep in a headband. Okay, so we got these and he was interested in using them. And so we just started doing those. That's it. I just did 32 yoga poses. That's how many came in the box from the dollar store. That's how I started. And I liked it. I liked the stretching. I'm not someone who's ever done yoga before. I wasn't like trying to intentionally set out to do that. In this pandemic, I couldn't really go to the gym, which was something I was trying to do before, although not all that successfully. And because I set the goal so low, just do some of these animal yoga cards that are meant for kids, I just started doing it and it felt good. And so I was getting that immediate reward. And then we decided we wanted some slightly more challenging poses. And so we bought another deck of cards that we do. So like I have my community, right? My kid who's interested in doing these things. And then I found myself looking for other outlets to move. But I started off so small. I literally could not fail. I'm better at this move than this cartoon pug is. So I could not fail at the goal. So it's that, and there's unicorns, they're lovely. But the idea of a habit is just that you scale the thing down small enough that you can repeat it over and over again. And then because it's just all prepared, and it's ready to go at any moment, I push the bad habits out by making the good habit the easiest option. Anything else I want to do requires setup, right? Anything else I want to do in my free time requires that I do a little prep work for it. But this one is just always there. So I just pushed the bad one out by making it harder and put the easier one in place and scaled it as small as I possibly could so I couldn't fail at it. All right, other questions? All right. Well, I want to remind you that faculty are easy to get a hold of by email. It's just the first letter of our first name and our last name most of the time. So if you need to get a hold of me, it's sruthven@mchenry.edu. You do not have to be my student to reach out to me via email. I'm more than happy to chat with you about habit things if you have other questions. I would encourage you all to, thank you. I would encourage you all to keep attending these workshops because these workshops are a mini community of people who are trying to make better habits. And it doesn't even matter if the topic of the workshop is one that necessarily you think like, oh, that I definitely need to work on that. It only matters that you're in a room with other people, in a Zoom room, even with other people who are making these kinds of changes. It will encourage you and motivate you and help kick that emotion up again. So keep working on these. And then there's student success coaches who are in here who I'm sure would love to talk to you about habit building. They know more about it than I do, I'm sure. So there's lots of opportunities, lots of resources to reach out to so that you don't feel alone as you're working on these habits. Because I have to think that that would feel really daunting if that's how you felt, right? Like you need that community in place.
Okay, well, I think we are good to go. Thank you so much, Sarah. Round of applause. And then also just to remind you, we will have our second student success workshop on February 24th at 2 p.m. So if you want to get more information on that, please let me know. I'll put my email in the chat too, so I can send you the flyer on that. Send me an email and I can get you set up. But thank you so much for coming. We appreciate you all. And thank you so much, Sarah, once again.
Yeah, thank you guys. Have a good week.